I never thought a car could feel like a mouth. But that night, the taxi swallowed me whole. Doors clamping shut like teeth, air thinning like a held breath, the city slipping past the windows as if it were being chewed and swallowed behind us. I remember the driver's voice first. Bright and ordinary, the way weather reports sound. "Long day," he said, meeting my eyes in the rear view. He had the kind of smile that shows up a fraction too fast, like it was already waiting there for me. It was a Thursday, close to midnight, and the bar on Ashland had emptied into the gutter like a pocket turned out. My friends had angled off in pairs toward ride shares that still smelled faintly like the dealership. I was the last to leave, the only one too stubborn to wait 3 times surge. A yellow cab rolled up at the curb, a real one, old school, paint chipped and honest. I told myself there was something safer about that. That's the thing about safety. You don't notice when it's a story you tell yourself until the story starts telling you. "Harbor and 19th, I said, buckling in. The seatbelt snagged for a beat and then slid home. The meter flicked to life with a red digital pop. We crawled through a light that had turned orange and then embarrassed itself into red. "Big night out?" he asked. His ID card dangled from the dash, a little laminated rectangle with his photo washed into oblivion by sunlight. The name read LEOK or LEOR. The letters smudged like it couldn't decide who it wanted to be. "Work thing," I said. Not big. I was already texting. "On my way. Love you." The bubble hung there and then sure okayed back from my roommate Erin. She'd left a porch light on. She always did. We passed the deli with the sign that never settled on open or ope. We passed the mural of a blue heron that always looked like it had a secret. And then we didn't pass the turn we were supposed to take. "Sorry," I leaned forward. "You missed." "I know a faster way," he said. "Construction on Harbor." His tone was casual, but his hands on the wheel were not. They sat at 10 and 2 like a pose he practiced in the mirror. The cab's plastic partition was the old kind, scratched cloudy where fingertips had tested it, where coins had grazed, and scarred its silver. I watched our blue route on my phone creep off itself and reroute, the way a lie builds a lie to keep from looking lonely. The new line zigzagged into the warehouse district where the city forgot to put names on streets. I felt for the door handle, habit, and my fingers landed on a metal nub that didn't move. Child locks. I told myself all cabs have them. I told myself lots of stories, very quickly. "Where'd you say you live?" he asked, like we were resuming a conversation. "I grew up near 19th. My sister still has a place over there." "Harbor and 19th, I said again slower. "You can just take—" "I've got you. You're safe with me." That word, safe, set off a fire alarm in a part of my brain I didn't know could hear. People who are safe never need to say it out loud. I opened the rideshare app out of reflex, before remembering I was in a cab, not a summoned car with a face and a star rating. No safety features in something older than your memories. We turned under a viaduct where the graffiti was thick as bark. The radio crackled with a voice that wasn't music. "Base to 27, copy?" it said. He reached out and dialed the volume down, smiling again. "Bright. Ordinary. Dispatch," he said, like he was indulging a spouse. Always nagging. My phone's map tipped, recalibrated, and then spun like a bottle with no table. Service stuttered, then bit down to 1 bar, then nothing. I lifted it toward the headliner, as if height could make a tower sprout under us. "You can just take Front Street," I said, and was proud of how steady I sounded. "It'll spit us right out at Harbor." He checked me in the mirror. His eyes had a color I couldn't name, not because it was rare, but because it was the color you give to appliances and carpet, something you can't prove later. "Front's closed," he said. "Police stuff." "Funny," I said. "I didn't see any lights." I wanted him to know I was paying attention. I wanted him to know he was a bad liar. "Yeah." He tilted his head, amusement curving. "Maybe you weren't looking." That was the moment I understood the car wasn't misled. It was choosing. It's strange how quickly your brain re-engineers itself for survival. In one breath, I phased from customer to captive. I cataloged what I could reach. The belt latch, my keys, the blunt geometry of my phone. The partition had a slider window an inch wide with a metal lip. On the floor by my feet, an old receipt printer from the meter coughed out a curl of paper, the tale of the last fare. I picked it up and palmed it like a magician palming a coin. If you ever need to scream and can't, your body will find smaller ways. Mine started to annotate the scene. The dashboard smelled like orange cleaner. The left speaker rattled on bass. He wore a black silicone wristband that had been snapped and repaired, the crack white as a scar. We left the last living intersection behind and rolled into streets that weren't all the way paved. The cab thudded. Someone had dumped a mattress against a chain-link fence, and it lay there like a body practicing. I pictured Aaron's porch light like a lighthouse losing its bulb. "Hey," I said, leaning forward until my forehead almost touched the plastic. "I'm gonna be sick. Can you pull over?" I even made my voice loose and embarrassed. I've never been a good liar, but terror makes quick studies. He laughed, and the sound had no edges. He said, "That trick is older than me. Sit tight." The radio crackled again, a woman's voice this time, calm and continuous like something pre-recorded. 27, copy status, she said. He pressed the talk button without taking his eyes off the road. En route, taking the riverside. My hands were not shaking. I register that now as a miracle. I pulled a pen from my jacket, an ugly freebie with a bank logo that had smeared to Bay K. I smoothed the receipt paper against my thigh and wrote in block letters, "Help, Riverside, Taxi 27. I waited for a moment when the cab leaned to the right and let the receipt flutter against the door seam where the rubber weather stripping didn't quite make its case. It stuck there. It wouldn't be there long, but it was there. He saw me do it. I knew because his smile changed shape, thinned, tightened, as if I'd plucked a string he'd tuned. "People litter too much," he said. "Bad for the birds." The words were gentle, but he pressed his thumb into the wheel so hard, the silicone band went pale. "What's dispatch?" I asked. "Is that the woman?" He was quiet, a breath too long. "Company line," he said. "They like to know where I am." "So do I," I said, before I could stop myself. He glanced at the mirror again, and this time his eyes had a temperature. "You're funny." I am not funny when I'm afraid, but my mouth keeps working. A panic motor. "You said your sister lived near me," I said. "What's her name?" He did not answer. We took a right so slow, it felt like the car was thinking about it. A chain of streetlights flickered out above us the way dominoes fall, one by one, then all at once. The river appeared on our left, black and busy, carrying something I couldn't see. On the concrete wall, someone had spray-painted a message in white. "I know a shortcut." It looked new. My stomach turned. "Tell me your name," I said, because people are less likely to harm people who insist on their details staying in the room. He tapped the plastic ID holder with one finger. "It's right there." "Then say it," I said. The smile again, like a coin trick. "Leo," he said. "Happy now?" Oddly, yes. Names weigh things down. They make them harder to throw. "Leo," I said back, tasting it. He didn't flinch. The road narrowed until weeds signed their names on the doors. On the passenger seat, a stack of laminated maps lay fanned like cards. Next to them was a small canvas bag with a red cross on it, the drugstore kind of first aid kit, probably required by someone who got tired of paying out claims. A flashlight lay on top. My brain underlined it. Battery, bulb, weight. I remembered something Aaron once told me, drunk on a Tuesday. If you need help but can't call 911, call any emergency number you know will pick up and scream. She had put the fire department and the elevator repair line into her contacts just in case life has a weird sense of humor. My thumb woke my phone. No bars, no humor. "Leo," I said, the words steadying me. "Do you ever worry about, Who gets into your cab? He chuckled, a small warm thing. All the time, he said. People are unpredictable. He let that sit with me until it got uncomfortable. But I prepare. How? He ran his tongue along his molar, thinking. Habits, he said. You learn people's tells. You talk just enough. You don't let them direct you. He looked at me then, and there was nothing empty about his eyes anymore. You don't stop. Even if they're sick? I asked Small. Especially then, he said. The receipt had wrinkled itself halfway free. The wind didn't want it. The car's speed did not deserve the word. We were inertial, moving because we had once been asked to and never told we could stop. I palmed my earring, silver, cheap, a circle, and slid it along the rubber until it wedged next to the paper. The cab hummed like a fridge. Base to 27, the woman's voice said again, as if she'd been on hold in our air the whole time. Confirm river route. Confirmed, he said. What's the destination? She asked. He clicked the radio off. My heart, I swear, heard the click more than my ears did. They never stick to the script, he said, almost to himself. I tried a different script. I have asthma. There's an inhaler in my bag. Can I? He shook his head. Already saw what's in your bag. Ice climbed my spine rung by rung. My bag had been at my feet. I pulled it into my lap, unzipped it. Everything was there in the way that counts. Everything had been looked at in the way that changes it. The zipper tab felt warm. He had touched it not long ago. I swallowed. I left my wallet at the bar, I lied, reaching again. We should go back. No, he said softly, the way a parent says no to a child who wants to touch the stove. We came this way for a reason. He tapped the meter, which was still running, as if that could make this transactable. Don't worry, he added, and the word broke like a twig under a shoe. I'm good at what I do. What do you do? I asked, because sometimes you want the monster to name itself, even if the name is the last thing you ever hear. He smiled at the windshield. I take people where they need to go. We passed a boarded-up bait shop, its window papered with sun-faded posters. There were hooks drawn on them, curved and patient. I stared at the hooks and thought about leverage, about how things don't break until they do. Are you going to kill me? I said. I do not recommend asking the question. I also don't know how to live with not having asked it. That depends, he said, and lifted his hand from the wheel to adjust the mirror so it showed me, not the road, on whether you make me. Up ahead, a rusted chain sagged across a narrow service lane, padlocked to a post. He slowed, blinkers ticking like a metronome for a song I didn't want to hear. Quick stop. Gate's always sticky. He slid the cab into park. When his door cracked, I heard it, the holy clunk of the central locks lifting like a drawbridge. The sound went through me like electricity. He stepped out, the cab rocking. The instant his heel hit gravel, I yanked up the door lock peg and shouldered hard. The door gave like a stubborn jaw, and the night hit my face cold and granular. I ran. Behind me, his shout wasn't words at first, just a sound that meant stop. Gravel slid under my flats, sharp and treacherous. I kicked them off and kept going. The river smell grew teeth. To my right, the service lane tunneled between frozen reed beds toward a shadowed clearing where the ground dipped and the world sounded different, hollow and close, like standing inside a drum. Hey! He shouted, closer. You're going to get hurt! That's the point, I wanted to say. People call it fight or flight, but there's a third arthritic option like a door that doesn't open all the way. Plan. Even running, part of me was inventorying. The padlock on the chain, the post, the clutter at the roadside. An orange road cone, toppled. A cracked plastic milk crate. A beer bottle glittering in weeds. Trash, yes. Tools, maybe. I cut left, ducked behind a hump of concrete like a dead whale, and crouched. My lungs burned. He slowed. Gravel sounded smarter under his boots. He was listening, and then he was not listening. He was remembering. Predators live off pattern. He'd done this here. He knew where people tried to hide. The thought made bile climb. I pressed my back against the concrete, felt damp roll through my jacket. My eyes adjusted, and the world pressed its details into me whether I wanted them or not. A coil of rusty wire, a deflated soccer ball, a roadside emergency kit cracked open and abandoned, its plastic triangle snapped, its red cylinder, oh God, was still there. A road flare. I didn't believe it at first. I touched it like it could vanish. The cap was scuffed but intact, the striker end rough as a cat's tongue. I heard his steps stop. He was between me and the open lane now, between me and the cab, between me and any story I wanted still to tell. I pulled the cap, braced, and screamed. Not words, not help, not anything to do with language, just sound. While I struck the flare and it bloomed into a small, brutal sun. The night went blood bright. He flinched, a real animal flinch. And there was a second where I saw him as a person again. Windbreaker, jeans, a tiny smear of mustard at his cuff like he had eaten a hot dog and kindness once in the same afternoon. Then he came at me with his arms up, not to hit, but to take away the light. "Drop it," he said, but his voice had changed keys. I didn't drop it. I held it like a sword and ran toward him, which is not what people expect when you're the one with the smaller body. He wavered, calculation crowding fear in his face, and stepped back. I used that space to skim past him and bolt for the lane. Flare spit. Little molten birds leapt from it and died in the wet weeds. I kept it high and angled so the sparks couldn't find me. The cab sat with its driver's door yawning, dome-like bawling out a dull halo. The radio, unmuted by his movement, hissed the woman's calm that suddenly sounded like a toy. 27, status not confirmed. Respond. Respond, I mimicked. A stupid impulse, but I couldn't help it. Then I threw the flare into the front footwell like a comet. It didn't explode. Life isn't a movie. The mat hissed and smoked. The rubber yelped and then settled into a steady, ugly burn. He swore, a soft, domestic word you'd use in the lost sock, and lunged past me to bat at it with his windbreaker. I grabbed the canvas first aid kit from the passenger seat through the open door, turned, and ran again. This time, up the lane. Behind me, the flare punched itself confidently into its single job: make a problem. Headlights swelled at the top of the lane. Tall, squared, humming diesel. A semi. Its horn let loose a bellow that put the river to shame. The driver must have seen the fire colors gnawing at the cab. The truck slowed, angled, blocked. I waved like I was trying to unscrew my own shoulders. The semi's brakes sighed and the door clanged. A shape in a cab jumped down, boots hitting gravel with the decision of a verdict. "You're all right?" he started, but the words rearranged themselves in his mouth when he saw the man running behind me. He changed who he was in a second, from driver to wall. He stepped between us without asking for a story. "I need her back," Leo said, breathless, hands up like that could make them look empty. She's not well." "I'm not," I agreed. "With you." The trucker, his name stitched in navy thread, said Cal, flicked his eyes from me to the smoldering cab to Leo's 2 clean shoes. "Callin' 911, Cal said, almost conversational, already fishing. "Stand down." Leo smiled that unfastening smile, and for the first time the charm had no power on a human being in daylight. "We can all be reasonable," he said. "Sir," Cal said, phone to ear, "you picked the wrong shoulder to run on." Sirens are a fiction until they're yours. They braided out of the city and into the dark. Leo gauged the math: 1 woman, 1 man, 1 lit car, 1 pending flock of police, and chose the equation with the highest chance of vanishing. He ran. Cal swore the kind of word you'd knit into a quilt and handed me the phone. "Talk," he said. I told the dispatcher the part of the truth I could glue together. I told her the color of the cab, the number 27, the route by the river, the chain and the gate, and the receipt that fluttered like a moth catching fire. Cal stood by me, a big, patient geography. The cab kept shedding black ribbon smoke into the stars. Police came first, like they always do near highways. Then fire, sheepish because the river didn't let things stay hot for long. A young officer escorted me to the back of his cruiser and gave me a shock blanket, which everyone makes fun of until you're underneath one. I held it like a contract and told the story again. The woman from the radio lived inside my sentences. The officer wrote her down as if she were a real person. Dispatch, he said. Company line? Maybe, I said. It sounded thin, like a recording. He nodded like a teacher at a half-right answer. We'll figure it out, he said, and for a second, I wanted to believe that the figuring would travel faster than fear. A second cruiser eased up, and a third. One officer with a camera walked the gravel and came back holding a torn receipt with big block letters. Help. Riverside. Taxi 27. He showed it to me like a magic trick. Yours? Yes, I said, and the word broke something open in my chest that wasn't crying but had thoughts about it. We see, he said. Eventually, we see. The ER was bright enough to make grief look clean. They took my vitals, took my statement, took photos of the place on my shoulder where the door had gnawed and the place on my palm where the flare's heat had kissed me too close. A nurse clipped the shock blanket away like a cape, replaced it with a paper-thin sweater they called a gown, and asked if I had someone who could come sit with me. Aaron, I said, and the name broke open a secret trembling in my chest. My roommate. The word roommate suddenly felt too small to hold what she was to me, the person who knew which mug I cried into and which television show could resuscitate my brain. She arrived pink from the neck up, hair in a loose knot like a storm had done it. You texted me on my way and then nothing, she said. The way she hugged me made the monitors chirp their indignation. If that truck driver hadn't answered when I called back... Cal, I said into her hair. His name is Cal. Cal, bless him and his diesel heart, she said, wiping her face with the side of her wrist. Detectives came as Dawn remembered how to be a color. 2 of them, the way they always come in pairs, as if the truth needs a spotter. One was tall, silver gray at the temples, with a voice like coffee that had been left on the warmer too long. Morales. The other looked younger than me in a way that offended me because here we all were, adult people under fluorescent lights. Chew. Walk us through it, Morales said, and set his notebook on his knee with a small, reverent pat. I told the story again, this time slower, arranged in folders. They let me keep my metaphors. They asked about the radio, the woman's voice, the number 27, the shortcut sign painted on concrete like a promise. Dispatch could be a scanner, Chu said. You can buy one at a yard sale and teach it to talk. It asked him to confirm the river route. It knew where we were. Saying it out loud felt like putting my hand into a dark pocket to prove it was empty. Morales nodded in a way that meant he had put a pin in something on the wall in his head. The cab? He asked. Older, the kind that has a weight to it even when it's not moving. The partition was scratched cloudy. His ID card was bleached. It said Leo K or R? I couldn't tell. I told them about the silicone wristband, the crack like a small healed bone, the mustard smear at his cuff, the way he said safe like a dare. He said he had a sister near 19th. They glanced at each other like a baton had been passed in a relay I was not trained to run. We'll need you to come by the station later, pull a few photos, see if anyone looks like your guy. I never saw his face straight on without the glass between us, just the mirror. I remember his eyes the way you remember a smell. That helps, Chu said. You'd be surprised. I was surprised by almost everything, by how the city outside the hospital window went on being a city, with buses sighing and dog walkers apologizing, the way life continues even with its fingers on its lips. By how Aaron had somehow found a pair of sweatpants for me that felt like they'd been mine all along. By how the detectives knew the right amount of silence to wrap around a person before words could come out intact. We left with a list of instructions that made safety sound like a scavenger hunt. Change your locks. Vary your routine. Don't post your routes. Call if you see that phrase again. I know a shortcut. Take photos. Tell your neighbors. Keep your porch light honest. Cal waited outside with a styrofoam cup that smelled like gasoline disguised as coffee. They treatin' you right? He asked. I keep getting called ma'am, which is apparently the price of surviving. He smiled with his whole jaw. You need a ride? I'll take you, and then chuckled at his own choice of words. Sorry, I know. Actually, yeah, I'd rather ride with you than anyone with a meter right now. Erin rode with us even though her Prius sat 3 cars down, clean and virtuous, ready to be trusted. She said, "It can sit. It can learn humility." Cal's cab, truck, 18-wheeler, I don't speak fluent machine, rocked us gently down the ramp, the dashboard full of knobs that looked like they wanted to be touched. He put the radio low like a heartbeat under a blanket. "How often you drive nights?" I asked him. "Too often. Nights feel like they belong to us working folks, till something like this happens and you remember they don't belong to nobody." He shrugged the kind of shrug men use when they want to not make a thing heavier by lifting it. "You saved you," he said. "I just brought the horn." Erin reached for my hand on the bench between us and made a little knot out of her fingers. The river kept itself to our left like a line we had crossed and were not allowed to recross for a while. The station smelled like old paper and new worry. Walls made of cork, walls made of whiteboard, walls made of reports that had waited for someone to hear them. Morales put a photo array in front of me, 6 faces at a time, printed on glossy that made them look like yearbook volunteers for a club you didn't want to join. "Take your time," he said. "There's no prize for speed." I went row by row, hungry for something that would unlock the hinge between my memory and my mouth. Eyes, ears, the way a jaw holds regret. He was not there. I told them so. Chu collected the sheets like I'd failed the test, but should be proud of myself for showing up. "We'll keep at it," she said. They took me to the evidence room where the melted remains of the cab's mat sat inside a tub, surprised to find itself a thing worth keeping. "We got a partial VIN off the frame," Morales said. "Filed down, but metal remembers. We'll backtrack it to whatever yard it came out of." "Yard," I said, tasting the word. "Junkyard?" "Decommissioned fleet sale," Chu said. "Company shut down a year ago. Caro Cab LLC, a graveyard for the yellow and the tired." "And the dispatch?" I asked. Radio in the dash was a scanner with a cheap loopback, but we found a memory card in his console. He held up a Ziploc with a square inside, tiny and smug. Might have your friend in there, might be nothing. I thought of the woman's voice, calm and unfussed. "Confirm river route." "What if it's real?" I said. "What if that voice is someone?" Chu nodded. "We checked with the city's dispatch logs. Doesn't match. If there is a someone, she's not on our grid. Could be he recorded someone off a training tape, then spliced it. Could be a hobbyist playing at being a system. Or a partner," I said, and the room tilted a degree colder. "Or that," Morales allowed. "We don't assume until we get to." He had my bag on the table, everything inside arranged in a neat, shy line, the way the TSA arranges your belongings to remind you they could become evidence if they wanted to. "You said he rummaged." We dusted. "Prints are a mess. Worn down. Gloves, maybe? He left you this, though." He slid a small plastic bag toward me. My spare house key blinked up at me from inside it. I rolled my tongue over my teeth so I'd remember how I'd built them. I didn't even know it was missing. He could have, Morales said gently, and did not finish the sentence that lived past that cliff edge. We went home like it was a place that could catch us. Erin and I stood in the doorway of our apartment, a thing we used to do only when we locked ourselves out and pretended it was intentional. The porch light threw shadows that looked like answers to questions we hadn't asked yet. We changed the locks the way the paper told us to. We put a wedge under each door like an old superstition. We ate toast, because it was the only sentence we remembered how to make. At 3 a.m, the intercom buzzed one short, polite buzz, like a stranger trying to not be a stranger. Erin sat up in bed so fast hairpins flew. "Don't," she said, when I swung my legs over the side like a sleepwalker. "Don't even breathe toward it." "It could be the detectives," I whispered. "It could be the moon looking for rent," she whispered back. We waited. The buzz came again, longer this time, needier. We counted to 100 each in our own heads, and then the waiting learned our names and sat down between us. The buzz did not come a third time. The porch light blinked, as if someone had tested it with a thumb. In the morning, there was a small cardboard box on our mat, the size of a jewelry box that knew it shouldn't be sentimental. It was unmarked. I wanted to call Morales. I wanted to throw it into the river. Instead, because I am not always my own best witness, I opened it. Inside lay my earring, the cheap silver hoop I had used as a wedge for the receipt. clean now, polished. Under it, on a square of white index card, a printed sentence in serif font. You forgot this. I sat down on the hallway floor because the building didn't have any chairs out there. Erin didn't swear. Erin rarely swore. She said, very calmly, okay, and then, okay, the way people say a thing twice when they are tying their courage's shoelaces. She took a photo, she called Morales, she handed me the phone, and I listened to his voice get very, very awake. We're en route, he said. Don't touch anything else. I did, I said. I touched it with my whole life. They came with gloves and small evidence hotels for tiny objects to sleep in. They asked about the intercom buzzes. They checked the camera above the door that worked only when it wanted to. It had wanted to work at 2:58 a.m., only enough to record a smear of a shape with a hood that could have been anyone who owns a hood. It saw the box, then decided, hell with it. The rest was a blackout. We can stay somewhere else, Morales said. We'll patrol, but you should leave for a few days. Where? I asked. Erin answered for both of us. My sister's, across town, she said. She likes house guests until she doesn't. We can get 3 nights out of her before she remembers boundaries. We packed ridiculous things. 3 sweaters each, as if sweaters kept murderers away. Chargers for devices that felt fragile. Toothbrushes that felt brave. At Erin's sister's house, we slept in a room that had been painted yellow by someone who believed sunlight could be stored in walls. I woke to the sound of a woman's voice in my head, the one from the radio, asking me to confirm a route I would never take again. My heart pounded like it was late for everything. On the 3rd day, Morales called. We have something, he said. Partial plate off a gas station camera near the viaduct. Caught him rolling through with something like free time. Matches a plate from a decommissioned taxi bought at auction by a guy named Leonard Keegan, out of state. Goes by Leo sometimes not. Keegan, I said, tasting the name like we were at a wine tasting and I had no idea what to say. Does he have a sister? He paused, and that pause told me more than if he'd spoken. He has a person registered at his prior address named Keegan. Female. We're still untangling. Partner? Possibly a voice on a tape. Possibly more. I wanted them to tell me that the world behaved, that if you followed the lines on the road and the rules in your mouth, you would get home as a reward. Instead, Morales told me about patterns. Other women who'd reported drivers changing routes and changing stories, a girl who left a bar and never got to say whether her ride was yellow or white, a graffiti trail of, I know a shortcut, popping up in places where the city forgot to take care of its own. You're not alone, he said, and I knew he meant it both ways. It was Erin who had the idea that made the detectives pinch their noses like their brains were trying on sunglasses. She said, stabbing her finger at the table the way a coach stabs a playbook. He wants her scared. He wants control back. So give him a chance to try for it, but not really. You're suggesting a sting, Chu said. I'm suggesting theater, Erin countered. He's performing. Let him audition into a trap. Morales glanced at me. You up for that? I had not been up for anything in days except being horizontal and breathing shallow. But a person can get tired of being only a noun. Yes, I said. The word felt like a stance. The plan was a cluster of if-thens wrapped in a blanket of maybe. I would go back to the block where the bar on Ashland spit out its patrons in shy pairs. I would be a person at a curb again, checking a phone that had been set to project need. Plainclothes officers would swim the edges of the crowd. Cal, God bless the union of coincidence, had a delivery that took him within a block and a half of the river that night and offered to idle near a light like a minor deity. The detectives wired me, light as a secret, and taught me how to touch my collar if I needed to say I was not okay without saying it. Erin put her hands on my shoulders and said, You owe me 3 full years of boring after this. The night was cold enough to turn breath into proof. The bar bits fell onto the sidewalk. Laughter, apologies, that special rattle of the metal gate that always sounded like someone dropping a chain necklace. I stood where I had stood before and practiced looking like no one would miss me. A yellow cab rolled by. Genuine. It didn't slow. A white sedan with someone's brother at the wheel idled and then surrendered to a woman waving a cigarette like a wand. My phone vibrated with a text from Morales. "All good?" I typed back, "Breathing." 10 minutes became 20, became 30. The thing about waiting when you expect danger is that you begin to fear the absence of it. You start to think maybe danger is the only thing that's going to shake the snow globe and let the flakes fall in a pattern you can read. At 40 minutes, a taxi pulled alongside me and matched my pace. Yellow, old, paint that had decided to be several shades of itself. The passenger window rolled down, the driver's face stayed in shadow, the dome light a halo that had quit. "Need a ride?" he said, voice careful, unremarkable. "Not him," I told myself. You cannot know a monster by a line of dialogue. "I'm okay," I said, into the wire and out into the world. "Both. I'm waiting for someone." "You sure?" he asked. "It's late. Safe with me." The phrase hit me in the kneecap. I stepped back. "Officer," I said into my collar, soft. The world converged in a show of being prepared. A woman in a leather jacket who had been a patron a second ago became Chu, badge ghosting her ID. A guy wrestling with a bike lock became Morales, who apparently knew how to ride a bike if he needed to. The cab rolled away fast. Too fast, tires spitting last week's rain onto my shins. "Could be him," Chu said into her mic. "Could be a copycat. We spooked him anyway." "Or he spooked us," I said, angry at the way my voice trembled around my courage. We stood under the neon for 20 more minutes. My feet stopped being feet and became instruments for measuring time badly. "Wrap it," Morales said finally. "He's not biting where we've salted the water." We started back toward the undercover car like people who had to learn how to walk together. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. The screen said private in a way that felt like a joke. "Don't," Chu said, and I put it on speaker because I only had room in my body for one kind of rule at a time. 27, a woman's calm voice said, threaded through static, as if it were weaving. 27. Confirm. I stopped cold. It wasn't the exact phrasing. I had replayed that line so many times in my head, the syllables were worn smooth, but it was a cousin. Morales' face changed shape. "How did he get my number?" I asked, even though the answer was napping in my memory with its eyes open. He had rifled my bag. He had my key once. He had everything he wanted until I took something back with fire. "Stall," Chu mouthed. "Keep it going." "Copy," I said, pitching my voice low. "What's the destination?" Silence, and then, 27, stand by. The line clicked off. 5 seconds later, a text arrived. "I know a shortcut." The letters white on black in a font that implied a designer somewhere had signed off on this. A location pin sat under it, humming red. The service lane by the river, near the gate where Cal had blocked the world. "He's daring you," Morales said. "He's not going to expect us all to be there again." "Then we'll disappoint him," before my better angels could ask for a meeting. They patted us with cars, with uniforms dressed as civilians, with a K-9 team that looked insulted to be invited into a human mess. Cal's rig idled at a distance with his running lights on. Christmas quietly threatening. My wired heartbeat sounded like a metronome learning a remix in my ear. The pin dropped us not at the gate, but 50 yards before it, in a turnout crusted with bottle glass. A new sign had bloomed on the wall in white paint that hadn't had time to dry. "I know a shortcut," the words dripping like they had been cut from a throat. Under it, a small black speaker sat on the ground like a sacrament. "Don't touch," Morales said, but I was already hearing it. The calm woman's voice looping in a way that gave the word loop religion. 27. Confirm. 27. Confirm. Chu bent, gloved, lifted the speaker into an evidence bag like a baby bird into a towel. "He wants theater," she said, proving Aaron right. "He wants us to follow the props." The props did their job. From the dark, a taxi nosed forward, lights off. At the last second, the headlights flared, bleaching us all into a single white confession. The car stopped too close. I saw a flash of a face behind the glass, normal, a face you wouldn't turn twice for at a grocery store, and the wristband, cracked, white like bone. He smiled at me. A small thing. A private joke he wanted to keep, even now. Then he was gone. Reverse, tires biting gravel like it was personal, the car fishtailing into night. "Go," Morales said, and the world went with him. Sirens didn't wail. There's a way to be loud that lets a man fall in love with his own chase. I ran too, which surprised my lungs and then made them proud. Cal's rig swung with a slow grace into the path, not enough to block a rabbit, enough to make a man choose. The taxi veered hard right, back toward the service lane. He knew this map. It was his living room rug. He hit the chain, and the chain slapped back against the post with a sound like history corrects you. The car stalled, coughed, stalled again. He left it. He ran on foot. The K9 team made quick work of the distance between his want and our need. I saw him go down under controlled fury, a pile of limbs and choices. By the time I reached them, chest on fire, he was on his knees, hands behind his head, the world's smallest smile still trying to get out of his mouth like a splinter. He looked up at me as if he had delivered me to myself. "Told you," he said, conversational. "Safe with me." I didn't speak. There are times to give language a rest. They read him his rights in a voice that had been practiced for decades. He didn't seem to recognize the words, or he recognized them as lines from a play he had seen 1,000 times and never wanted to audition for. They put him in a car that had a cage, not to keep him out, but to keep the night from making a mess. "Good work," Morales said to me, as if I had turned in a paper on time. "What about the voice, the woman?" "Working it, Chew. We'll take his stuff apart until it tells us who she is." I looked down. On the ground where the taxi had lurched, something small and white glowed in the headlight like a moth pinned to air. An index card. Serif font. "You're welcome." I picked it up with 2 fingers and handed it to Chew. Then, because I'm someone who believes in symmetry, I took the shock blanket from the back of the cruiser and put it around my own shoulders before anyone could pretend I was okay. Interviews feel like being unstitched slowly. They asked questions in 3 rooms with 3 different coffees. Had you seen him before that night? Any chance he knew you? What would you say if I told you were not the first to get that message on a receipt? The last one opened a door in me that had been leaning on a chair. "How many?" I asked. "Enough, but not enough who got away." He watched my face like there was a code printed on it, and he'd just been handed the cipher. The memory card in his console turned out to be a small museum. Audio files with names that were not names, but numbers. A folder called Voice, with subfolders called River and City and Bass. Chew played one for me. The woman's voice, assembled from somewhere else, flattened the way a photograph flattens a mountain. 27 confirm, 27 advise. Someone had spent hours making pretend sound official until it grew teeth. "Where'd he get it?" I asked. "Trading tapes, open source recordings, police bands, emergency drills. He cut them up, stitched them, made a friend." And the sister, I asked. Morales shrugged. "He has one," he said. "She's not the voice. She lives 3 states over and wants nothing to do with him. Folks diverge. We all like to pretend blood knows who to be." Court came like weather. It took time, and then it took all the days at once. He pled not guilty because that's what people do at first when the story they've been telling themselves is better than the one the world is offering. They stacked charges like chairs: kidnapping, attempted homicide, arson for the flare in a car that wanted to remember it had been on fire. They called me a survivor in documents, which sits on the tongue like a medal and a bruise. I prepped a statement with the prosecutor, who wore her hair in a braid that told me she had once been a girl who ran fast and liked the sound her feet made. "You can read it," she said, "or you can say it and let the paper be your backup plan." I want to say it, I said, in my voice. He has enough voices. The day I spoke in court, the benches held women and men who blinked like animals introduced to light. A mother, a brother, a friend of a friend, a woman who had not known where her roommate was for 3 hours 10 months ago and never forgave sleep for taking her when it finally came. Aaron held my hand in the hallway and said, "Remember the violin teacher who told you to keep your wrists soft? Do the opposite." I laughed, which knocked something loose that had been stuck and dangerous. He was there, of course. He wore a suit that did its job. He looked smaller than fear had told me he was. I told him about the mouth of the car, about safe, about the flares you can buy in any aisle almost if you know which store names danger refuses to shop. I told the judge about the receipt paper and the pen that said back. I told the court that there should be flares in every bar in every cab for free. A bucket of them, like peanuts, like mints, like anything you take and forget to say thank you for. "And I will tell you this," I said, voice trying to be a bridge. "He said he takes people where they need to go. He thinks he knows where that is. He doesn't. We do. We need to go home." When it was over, when the room reinflated with air, when he was let out like a problem you are sending to another department, I went back to the river. Not alone. Aaron came. Cal came, unexpectedly, with a thermos that had never been washed enough to lose the memory of coffee. We stood where the chain had slapped back and we looked at the wall where the words, "I know a shortcut," had faded into the color of old bones. Cal said, "I brought something," and pulled from his truck 2 bright triangles, the roadside kind, the kind you set up to say a thing without saying it. We planted them near the wall and left them there. We came back the next day and the next. Other people had left other things, ribbons, notes, the small, sacred trash of grief. Someone had made a box, weatherproof, and filled it with flares. I started carrying a flare in my bag not because I wanted to light everything on fire, but because my hand liked to know the weight of something that could announce me to the night. I started volunteering with a group that walked people to their cars without making them feel like children. We made maps of lit routes and asked businesses to fix their bulbs with the urgency they bring to fixing their espresso machines. I learned the name of the guy who replaced street lamps for the city and texted him when one died. He texted back like he had been waiting his whole career to be on someone's speed dial. Sometimes, late, my phone still rang private. When I answered, which I did sometimes because bravery and curiosity are cousins, the calm woman's voice came through like a ghost who had learned manners. 27, confirm? She said. I would say, "You don't live here anymore," and hang up. Once, I saved the file and sent it to Morales, who replied with a thumbs up, and, "We're working to make the calls stop. It will take time." He didn't lie to me. He didn't say they'd stop tonight. Aaron bought us a doorbell camera that looked like an eye. We waved at it sometimes the way you wave at a child who's pretending not to look. We learned our neighbors' names, which is a kind of spell. We started a group chat that had too many notifications until the one night it didn't. The night a stranger stood too long in our stairwell. The building learned how to clear its own throat. The city changed in little ways. A bulletin in bars near the viaduct. Free water, free chargers, free flares. A sticker on decommissioned cabs at the yard. Not in service, no passengers, not your ride. A sequence of numbers you could text to report graffiti that made you uneasy. A woman on the city council, who had hated the phrase public safety because of how many people had dressed up as it, stood on a corner with me and asked where we should put the light. I showed her. They put it there. The last time I saw Leo was not the last time I saw him. He returned in people with the same eyes, at the grocery store, in men who honked and then apologized for honking, in my own mirror when I was too tired to be kind to myself. But the last time I physically saw him was at his sentencing. He tried to meet my eyes like we were a story we had co-written. I looked at the judge instead. I looked at the part of the room where something bigger than him lived. After, in the echoing hall, A woman, about my age, with streaks in her hair like lightning, held out a hand that shook. "I found a receipt once," she said. "Not yours. Mine. I thought it was a prank. I thought I was making myself important by thinking it meant me. I'm sorry. I'm glad you didn't die." "I'm glad you didn't either," I said. We stood there like balloons no one had popped, unwilling to float away. Months went by the way months go by when you're busy telling your brain that it's okay to relax in empty rooms. I took daytime cabs. I sat behind the driver on buses instead of by the window because sometimes survival looks like an unromantic choice. I started to run again, slow and ugly, the way a person runs when she's not chasing anything but air. One afternoon, I was leaving the grocery store with a bag that insulted my wrists, and a man stepped into my path the way people do who have forgotten everyone else is also on their way somewhere. He wore a windbreaker. His cuff was clean. He smiled a bright, ordinary smile. "Long day?" he asked, like he had been left in a drawer and had forgotten what his mouth was for. For a second, my body did exactly what it had been trained to do. It made me a camera. Details sharpened until everything else fell away. The sound of a cartwheel complaining, the smell of oranges bruising, the micro pause between his words and his next breath. He wasn't Leo. He was a stranger who had inherited a line from a world where we talked to each other to practice being safe. I swallowed and let my jaw unclench. "Better one now," I said, and stepped around him into a morning I hadn't noticed had been waiting at the curb. At home, Aaron had printed something to tape by the door, a list of cab numbers we trusted, a hotline we had invented for ourselves that consisted of each other, a sequence of reminders that looked like a poem if you squinted. "Text me when you leave. AirPods down in the street. Don't say you live alone. Sit behind the driver. Check the child lock. Know your route. Keep your flair." Sometimes we tell stories because they change us. Sometimes we tell them because they change the world we're telling them into. I told mine on a podcast that a friend's friend ran. I told it at a high school where all the girls were made of angles and ambition, and all their teachers looked like they wanted to pat every head and never go home. I told it to a lawyer who specialized in suing companies for the way their cars pretended to be innocent. I told it to myself at night when sleep tried to bargain with me, and I needed to set the price. I never rode with 27 again. That number belongs to the part of the city that swallowed and spit me back. But once, months later, a new cab idled at a red light near Harbor and 19th, where they had finally finished the construction that had never been there. And the driver tapped his horn, not rudely, just hey. I looked up. He had hung a cardboard sign from the partition that said in black marker, "No shortcuts." I laughed in a way I had not heard myself laugh since. "Home?" he called through his open window, and for a heartbeat I thought he had somehow known me. He hadn't. It was just a word cabs know how to say. I nodded and got in and sat behind the driver and told him the route I knew. And he took it like the city had been waiting all this time to be this exact size. Sometimes I wake up to the sound of a radio in my head. It says, 27, confirm. Then Erin's door opens and her foot makes that particular floorboard complain, and she says through the wall like a dispatch I subscribed to on purpose, "Kitchen's open." I get up and go there. I confirm. If you ask what the ending is, I'll tell you it's not a line. It's not even a lock. It's a porch light that stays on because someone remembered. It's a flare in a glove compartment. It's a receipt with a name on it and a thumb that makes ink smear on purpose so it will belong to a human. It's a chain that gives a little and then holds. It's the memory of a truck horn folding the night into a shape that fits back into your hands. And it's this. I still ride at night sometimes. I like the way the city holds itself together under its own weight. I like the conversations you hear at stoplights. I like the quiet that falls when a stranger decides that being kind is a thing you can do without thinking and then keep doing. I get in and the door closes and it sounds like what it is. A door. Not teeth, not a mouth. A door. And I always make sure it opens back up. Epilogue. 1 year later. They asked me to come speak at the unveiling of a plaque by the river. It wasn't large. The city had money for floods and potholes and convincing billionaires to put their names on parks, not for metal rectangles that told you what happened to women when the lights were out. But it was there now, bolted to the wall near where the words had been, and it said what it needed to say without poetry. Cal stood in the back, a little embarrassed that someone had asked him to come, and more embarrassed that he had. He wore a clean cap that made his ears look younger. Morales and Chu stood shoulder to shoulder like a school photo, sleeves rolled the same way because partners become their own small nation. Aaron took photos but didn't post them, because not everything with light deserves to be followed by likes. I read a short thing about thank yous and about receipts and about the way a voice that sounded like safety had turned out to be a mask someone had stitched from other people's mouths. I said the names of the women whose families had given us permission to say them out loud in a place where air could carry them far. Alana, Grace, Mina, and Noor. I said them slow enough that I could hear the wind forget it wasn't an audience. After, Cal handed me the thermos like it was an award. "You still carrying that flare?" he asked. "In my bag," I said. "And in my head." He nodded, satisfied, like a foreman who had found a good pair of hands. On the way home, a taxi slowed alongside me and a driver leaned over to call, "Need a ride?" He had one of those smiles that knows when to show up. I almost said no. Then I said yes and gave him my address, and when we reached the turn for Harbor and 19th, he took it without asking if I wanted a faster way. We stopped at my building. The porch light burned a small hole in the night. "Thanks," I said, and handed him cash, because sometimes you need to feel the exchange in your fingers. He looked at the bills, and then at me, and then up at something over my shoulder. "You dropped this," he said, and from the railing behind me, he plucked a small circle of metal, cheap, silver, familiar. My earring. I swallowed the old fear like a pill that knew it wasn't needed. "Thanks," I said again, and slid it into my pocket without putting it back in my ear. I went inside. Aaron said, "Kitchen's open," and I stood there for a second listening for a radio I didn't hear. It was quiet, not empty. Sometimes that's the difference. When I sleep now, I dream in routes, in lines that know where they're going, in signs that don't lie, in doors that close and open and close and open, the way lungs learn a rhythm and keep it. When I wake, I write down the ones that felt like maps, and I keep them in a drawer. If you came over, I'd show you. We'd draw them together, new ones, better ones. We'd write them on receipt paper and tuck them in our pockets and go out anyway. And we would come home. Postscript. On voices. Sometimes, when a podcast calls or a reporter with a pen asks the same question 3 ways, they ask me about the voice, about the calm woman, about whether she haunts me. "Did you ever find out who she was?" they say. Like there has to be a woman to pin the sound to. We found the tapes. We found the way he had cut people's lives into uniform words and used them as a disguise. We found a handful of tracks where someone else, maybe a friend he had once, maybe a person he paid, added a line that didn't exist in any training set. "Confirm river route." Even in that cruelty, there was a kind of emptiness. It wasn't a chorus. It was a man playing dolls with an audience he wanted to never answer back. I answer back anyway. When the calls come, less frequent now, I pick up and let the voice roll through its script. And then I say my own sentence into the silence between its comma and its period. "I'm not yours." The line goes dead. Someday it will stop ringing. I believe that like I believe in stoplights. The last piece of this is simple. On the anniversary of the night that turned the car into a mouth and me into a person who learned to pry it open, I take a cab to the river. I stand there with a flare I don't light. I say the names out loud again, and I add my own, not because I want to be in their company, but because I want to promise we don't lose what we keep saying. Then I go home the long way, the visible way, the lit way, the one with witnesses and laughter spilling out of bars. And when the driver says at my curb, "Home?" I say, "Yes." And the door opens, and the door closes, and the light stays on.